Hello and welcome for viewers in the UK and around the world. I'm Sean Lay, live in Downing Street in London. The headlines this hour. Britain's new Prime Minister Liz Truss has held the first meeting of her top team, the Cabinet, after a reshuffle of government positions. Ministers insist the international energy crisis is top of her agenda.
I think it's important that all the tyres are kicked, as it were, to make sure that we have a robust energy proposal in order, as I say, to set out that can be set out to help households and businesses, and details on that will be coming this week.
If Liz Truss announces that she's adopting Labour's plans, we welcome that and the country will welcome that, but we really haven't got the detail.
And I'm Geeta Gurumurthy in the studio. Our other headlines. The UN Security Council hears calls for a security zone to shield Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia power plant, which is under Russian control. Reports say documents seized by FBI agents at Donald Trump's home include highly sensitive nuclear papers of a foreign power.
Welcome to the heart of British government, where politicians hope to make the weather. Politically, they can't do much about the weather that we're experiencing at the moment. So excuse the umbrellas and the shadows. We're hoping that the sunshine will be with us again. Certainly the cabinet ministers were able to leave this morning's meeting in Downing Street behind me just a few minutes ago in sunshine and with smiles, which is entirely understandable. Many of them around the British cabinet table for the first time, as the new Prime Minister who took office yesterday really begins to get her feet under the table. We've had a photograph released by Downing Street showing the new ministers, and what a contrast to those last pictures we had of the Boris Johnson cabinet. You'll remember those pictures which showed Theresa Coffey, then Work and Pension Secretary, now Deputy Prime Minister and Health Secretary, looking directly at the Prime Minister and not with a happy expression on her face. And we know what followed soon afterwards. Well, she has been one of the beneficiaries of the change at the top. She's a close personal friend and ally of Liz Truss. She is now number 2 in her government. We'll hear from her in a few minutes. First, though, our political correspondent Ben Wright reports on the new cabinet and the challenges it's facing.
Elected by Tory party members after Boris Johnson's downfall, Liz Truss entered number 10 promising a fresh start. But with energy bills soaring and a recession forecast, it's going to be tough.
I will get Britain working again. I have a bold plan to grow the economy through tax cuts and reform. I will cut taxes to reward hard work and boost business-led growth and investment. We shouldn't be daunted by the challenges we face. As strong as the storm may be, I know that the British people are stronger. Our country was built by people who get things done. We have huge reserves of talent, of energy and determination. I am confident that together we can ride out the storm.
The handover of power took place in the Highlands. Liz Truss met the Queen at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire. After accepting Boris Johnson's resignation, the Queen appointed the 15th Prime Minister of her reign, the country's 4th Conservative leader in just 6 years. After flying back to London, Liz Truss was driven to Downing Street, where torrential rain had threatened to wash out her speech. Confident of victory for many weeks, the new Prime Minister had already planned her cabinet. Her friend, Kwasi Kwarteng, is Chancellor, who will have to find billions of pounds to help people with energy bills. James Cleverly becomes Foreign Secretary, and Suella Braverman is in charge of the Home Office. Jacob Rees-Mogg becomes Business Secretary, and Theresa Coffey, one of Liz Truss's closest allies, is the new Health Secretary.
We've got priorities A, B, C, D, ambulances, backlogs, care, D, doctors and dentists, and we're going to work through that, and we'll make sure that we are delivering for patients.
Liz Truss begins this job at the toughest of moments, and she knows there is very little time to prove she can grip the challenges facing the country. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, I bumped into Therese Coffey, the new Health Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, as she left the BBC's Westminster studios where she'd been conducting interviews. And during one of those interviews, she offered this assurance about the priority the government is giving to helping consumers and businesses with those crippling energy bills.
Well, the Prime Minister set out yesterday on the doorsteps of Downing Street her three main priorities about growing the economy, tackling the energy situation and indeed the NHS. And in terms of energy, this is a combination of support to households and businesses, but also of supporting making our energy industry to make sure that we have sufficient energy coming through in the future. So both short-term and medium to long-term proposals there. That will be set out this week. That's what the Prime Minister said. You can understand that she's been Prime Minister for less than 24 hours while we've been working on plans in the run-up to this potential event. I think it's important that all the tyres are kicked, as it were, to make sure that we have a robust energy proposal in order, as I say, to set out that can be set out to help households and businesses, and details on that will be coming this week.
This, of course, is a political challenge for the Labour Party. A new Prime Minister, lots of positive headlines as the impression is given that it's a new government taking office. Of course, it's a continuation of government that's been in office really since 2010. And in some ways, Liz Truss finds herself the equivalent of, say, Alec Douglas-Home back in the 60s, the fourth Prime Minister in a run of Conservative Prime Ministers. But she will be hoping to avoid his defeat at the next general election by the Labour Party. So what does the Labour Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy make of Liz Truss's promises on energy?
If Liz Truss announces that she's adopting Labour's plans, we welcome that and the country will welcome that. But we really haven't got the detail. I think what's important, if she is going to freeze bills, is where is the money coming from? Is it actually going to come from consumers, from bill payers down the line, or is it going to come from the oil and gas companies who have made huge profits, more than they imagined, and can actually afford to fund it? So we're going to need to see the detail, I think, in the hours ahead. And second, is she really going to go forward with those unfunded tax cuts, which Rishi Sunak thought were wrong, and certainly we can't understand because they're not at all going to benefit poorer people?
David Lammy there, our chief political correspondent Nick Eardley is in Downing Street with me. I wanted to pick up on a thought I mentioned just before David Lammy there, Nick. This is a new administration, but it's a continuation of a government that's been in office for a long time. What sort of extra challenges does that pose as she tries to give the impression that she's a new broom sweeping clean?
Well, look, it's a really important point, actually, because a lot of the ministers who are in really senior jobs now in this government, yes, they might be new faces to a lot of the audience because they've not been particularly prominent, but they've been really involved in what's going on in there. For example, the new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, the man who lived in number 11, he was business secretary for a while, so he was involved in all the energy policy that was developed under Boris Johnson. What always happens when you get a new Prime Minister, even if it's of the new party, is they set out their agenda. Yes. We saw Liz Truss yesterday stand here and say, here's what I want to do. But she has this strange set of circumstances where she's appealed to Boris Johnson's supporters. She stood there yesterday and praised Boris Johnson. So this isn't a break with the Johnson years. In some ways, there is a lot of continuity there. And I think that it will be at times challenging for Ms Truss to say, I am a completely clean sweep for the Conservative Party and for the government. However, she will try and say now, these are my priorities, this is what I'm going to do. And top of that agenda will absolutely, as you heard from Therese Coffey, and as Ms Truss has been making clear to her cabinet this morning, is going to be how do you deal with the energy crisis.
John, one quick last thought, Nick. How quickly, how much time, let me put it another way, how much time does she have? How much can she think that the public will be listening before they make up their mind about a new Prime Minister, particularly if it's a government that's the same government?
What I find really interesting is that every Prime Minister has huge challenges when they turn up. You know, David Cameron had the financial situation. Theresa May and Boris Johnson both had Brexit, but most of them had a bit time to sell their vision to the public, to work out what they were going to do exactly. Liz Truss doesn't. In answer to your question, she has, I reckon, about a day before she has to sell her energy vision to the country. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be formulated in a day. It's pretty much ready. My understanding is the Chancellor, the Business Secretary and the Prime Minister are putting the final touches to it at the moment. But she, tomorrow we expect, probably in Parliament, will set out a vision for how she's going to help the country with bills over the winter, businesses as well, how she's going to try and secure an energy supply to avoid future crises. That comes tomorrow. To be honest, I think in 2 hours' time, she's going to face a lot of pressure on it at Prime Minister's questions. Expect that to be dominated by the cost of living. She's got a really busy day. She's going to be appearing before Tory backbenchers this afternoon at the 1922 committee as well. So
Much
it's a
banging of desks, of course.
daunting entry, a daunting diary today, but most of all, a daunting timetable.
Nick Eardley, our Chief Political Correspondent. I know you'll be guiding us through it over the coming weeks and months of the Truss government. For now, thank you very much. Well, let's talk now to Julian Jessup from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Julian Jessup, thank you very much for being with us on BBC News. Before she was announced as the Conservative leader, you talked with some enthusiasm about her economic agenda. We know the things she'd like to do, but some of the things she's going to have to do are going to get in the way of that, aren't they? Not least having to borrow significant sums of money for a minister who basically believes that the state is too big and the government takes too much of our money.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I don't think anybody's really comfortable with the plan to fix energy prices. It's another massive state intervention. It's not particularly well targeted. And of course, it's hugely expensive. So I think this is a bad option. The point, though, is that it might be the least bad of a number of alternatives. The cold reality is that we're facing a massive economic and social crisis over the winter if prices are allowed to continue to rise. And I think a solution like this, although it's sort of one size fits all, at least it ends that uncertainty for households and for businesses. And also politically, to the point you were making earlier, it does buy her time. It does sort of put this problem back on to one side for now, and allows her to focus on the other things, the longer term supply side reforms in particular, that I think are what really she wants to be getting on with.
Kwasi Kwarteng, her new Chancellor, we're told will be meeting today with various representatives of the banking sector. What do you think he'll be trying to convey to them?
Well, I think this is partly about maintaining market confidence, and there has been clearly a wobble in the financial markets over the last few weeks. Sterling has been weak, and it's partly a US dollar story, but sterling has underperformed against some of our peers. Bond markets are having jitters as well, so the cost of government borrowing is up. So I think it's important for the new Chancellor to meet people in the city and reassure them about what the sort of medium to longer term plans are going to be. That said, the initial reaction to what the announcements we've had so far has been fairly sanguine. So yes, bond yields have risen, but not massively. It's still relatively cheap for the government to borrow over the longer term. So I think the idea of adding to the debt to deal with this sort of one-off cost of what is basically a wartime crisis is something the markets are reasonably comfortable with.
The challenge, I suppose, for Mr. Kwarteng, and as Nick was pointing out earlier, his boss at the Treasury, which is what Liz Truss is, because she's First Lord of the Treasury. Of course, she has the advantage of herself having been Chief Secretary, the number 2 job in the Treasury, so she knows her way around the balance sheet, is that you don't know for how long those borrowing costs will remain low.
Yes, that's right. There are no sort of, in a sense, almost no good news here. I mean, whatever you do, there are risks. But there are plans that the Liz Truss team has talked about, for example, lengthening the maturity of government borrowing. So you get a chance to lock in the relatively low interest rates that we have at the moment. And it is worth stressing that for now, at least, interest rates are still historically very low. Particularly if you take account of the level of inflation, real interest rates are actually still negative. So in the midst of a potentially very big economic and social crisis, now is actually not a bad time to be borrowing a little bit more.
Julian Jessup of the Institute for Economic Affairs. Thank you very much for that. Just one thing to point out to you that at the course of this morning is that the current Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, is due to give evidence to the Treasury Select Committee. That evidence is due to begin during the course of this hour. We will bring you anything significant he has to say. Just coming out now, the leader of the House of Lords, Lord Truss, who's a survivor really from the politics of old. He was in John Major's government as a speechwriter, and he even worked in the Conservative Research Department when Margaret Thatcher was leader. There's some history to have behind you. Back to you, Geeta.
Sean, thanks very much indeed for now from Downing Street. Just let me bring you two pieces of breaking news that we've had. One from Chelsea, who have sacked their manager, Thomas Tuchel. They have announced today. It's the day after they lost 1-0 to Zagreb in the Champions League group stage. And they have said in a statement on behalf of everyone at Chelsea FC, the club would like to place on record its gratitude to Thomas and his staff for all their efforts during their time with the club. This Chelsea, of course, is now led by a consortium led by Todd Boehly after that long period of Abramovich ownership. But this is not an expected piece of news, so we will get more reaction to that breaking news from Chelsea that they have parted ways with their manager, Thomas Tuchel. Another piece of news that's just come into us also, the former Manchester United footballer Ryan Giggs is to face a retrial on domestic violence charges. That's according to a judge who's ruled during a hearing today at Manchester Crown Court. That was after the initial first trial jury couldn't agree and were dismissed. So that is going to go to a retrial. Of course, there was a lot of commentary on the expense of the initial trial to the public purse, but that is going to go to a retrial with very serious violence, domestic violence charges that he is facing, but refuting, of course. So those two pieces of news have just come in. Now back to news on the economy, because insolvency experts say that tens of thousands of firms are at risk of going bust because of soaring energy bills unless the government provides support. The consultancy Red Flag Alert warned that without intervention, 50,000 substantial businesses, those with turnover of more than £1 million and more than 10 employees, could fail next year. Let's talk to Nicola Headlam, Chief Economist at Red Flag Alert, a company which monitors the financial health of firms. Thanks for joining us. We are expecting, of course, an announcement on energy costs from the government probably tomorrow. What is your research showing? What are the fears that many businesses are now facing?
Good morning, and what a busy day for economists. There seems to be a lot of us on the news for a change, which is very exciting. So yes, our business looks very deeply into the firm level micro data that sits underneath the news as regards small and medium-sized enterprises, their ongoing health and viability, but also their risk and resilience to shocks in the economy. So we started to wonder at the turn of the year clearly there were a number of serious shocks in the economy, the risk of interest rate rises, the risk of energy price hikes, issues around employment and filling vacancies in the economy. So we started to model a few different scenarios for a low growth but high energy scenario for a small or medium-sized enterprise. As you say, a substantial one, not micro business. There's lots of noise with micro business. People start up and fail quickly. But if you're, turning over £1 million and you've got 10 employees, that's a substantial business. And of that cohort, we found a huge number, 355,000, that would be incredibly sensitive to any of the wider economic factors affecting their ability to operate in their marketplace.
What are businesses saying that they need? What do you think they need?
Well, we're sort of through the looking glass as regards sums of money, aren't we? We sort of slightly got whiplash. We were fiscal conservatives on Monday, and by Thursday we're talking about hundreds of billions of pounds of new borrowing. And again, so the Institute of Economic Affairs person before was saying, borrow it on the open market at 2.9%, it's not that much. But what we have is, our solution for the SME sector could be 100 billion alone without starting to deal with the domestic problems of energy price rises for households. And our big concern, of course, is that if companies have to start choosing between paying wages or paying their energy bills, it's going to be a lot harder to pay a high energy bill in your house if you've been laid off from your job.
So you're saying that for government support just to go to businesses, that would cost 100 billion, another 100 billion on top of the supposed 100 billion that's already been talked about?
Well, I mean, again, in this new world, 100 billion here, 100 billion there. I mean, it's, in order to secure SMEs and these substantial companies that there's always companies that are not growing or at risk of carrying a lot of debt. And as I say, the red flag data can interrogate if a company is more hollow, if it is more zombified, or if it is asset rich. But essentially, businesses that have survived the pandemic and are sound. We had 26,000 businesses that we thought were going to fail in any event, but this is 26,700 more that we wouldn't have seen as a risk of failure until energy costs started to spiral in the way that they have.
Obviously, any borrowing does ultimately come back, at least in part, to the taxpayer, even if the economy can be grown. And therefore, this isn't what you're talking about, a transfer of money from, individual members of the public who pay taxes to businesses. Why should that be allowed to happen? Why should people be forced to do that when this government is promising lower taxes?
As I say, if Ed Miliband made a plan like this, or God forbid Jeremy Corbyn made a plan like this, they'd be laughed out of court. But as it is, for some reason, the profile that Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, these are not enthusiastic Keynesians, but the scale of the challenge is such that they're prepared to behave in this almost kind of counter, this thing that's quite counter to what they believe about being a low tax economy. But again, we did see that in the pandemic, whereby Rishi's stimulus was enormous in scale, and he saw himself as a low tax fiscal conservative also. So again, we're sort of through the looking glass really as regards economic orthodoxy. The point is, the issue is it's of such magnitude that even the most hawkish neoliberal is clamouring for the government to use their chequebook.
Yes, I mean, obviously we are awaiting this announcement, and one presumes that the government is going to talk about businesses and individuals in terms of energy support. Can you just give me an idea of say, one business, how much have their costs gone up? What does it mean for individuals?
So we did a deep analysis on these businesses that turned over £1 million. And if you were that business in 2020, so just before the pandemic, gosh, it feels like a million years ago, but it's only 2 years ago, on your £1 million turnover, you'd be using about 8% of your turnover for your energy bills. And then after everything else had gone out, you paid all your dues here, there and everywhere, you would make a profit of about £90,000. Now, same business, same turnover, even just doubling your energy bills, and as we've seen on social media and other places, people are talking about much, much more than that. So a 16% spend on £1 million turnover, rather than being a £90,000 positive, it'll be a £230,000 loss. And as I spoke this morning to colleagues on breakfast, your directors are not going to be in place very long. Nobody can absorb that kind of hit. It's enormous. So the difference between 90,000 up to 230,000 down, and that is not factoring anything apart from energy, which is what leads us to another 26,000 businesses at immediate risk of folding.
Okay,
And
well, I'm sure that the government are looking at all the different sectors where they need to offer some immediate help. But of course, if it's 100 billion this year plus your 100 billion, and then this rolls over to next year, and we don't know how long the Ukraine war is going to go on for, this is surely unaffordable.
Well, I mean, the thing is that the new Prime Minister and the new Chancellor, as everyone keeps saying, their in tray is kind of exploding with immediate priorities, longer and medium term, and God forbid, actually thinking strategically about energy supply, about energy production. I think one thing I would say is again, it's lovely to see so many economists all over the news, but there is a sense that I think we've lost a couple of years on these agendas, and I think we could all cast a guess as to why.
Okay, Nicola Headlam, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Red Flag Alert. Thank you. Now, the UN Secretary-General has set out steps for the creation of a demilitarised zone around the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. Antonio Guterres told an emergency meeting of the Security Council that Russian forces should leave the area and Ukraine should promise that it won't move its troops in. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow needed more information, but it has repeatedly rejected calls to withdraw its forces from Zaporizhzhia, saying troops are protecting the complex. Our correspondent Hugo Bachega reports from Kiev.
This morning, we heard from Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, saying that he requested clarification from the International Atomic Energy Agency after that report was published yesterday. He said there is a need for additional explanation because there are a number of issues in the report. Now, the IAEA issued this report after inspectors visited the Zaporizhzhia complex yesterday. The report said the monitors observed damage at different locations at the Russian-occupied facility. Russian military vehicles and personnel are positioned across the complex. And the report also raised concern about the situation involving the Ukrainian staff operating the station. The monitor said the situation is unacceptable because these workers are having to endure high stress and also a lot of pressure. And the report called for the creation of a safety zone around this facility. Now, yesterday at that emergency meeting, Antonio Guterres called for the creation of a demilitarized zone. He's been calling for this zone for quite some time now. He said that Russian military personnel should leave the area of the station and Ukraine should promise that it would not move its troops in. But it's hard to see it happening because so far the Russians have rejected any proposal that it would include Russian troops being removed from this area. And Russia has been saying that Russian troops are there protecting this plant.
Hugo Bachega there in Kiev for us. Now, Chelsea Football Club have sacked Thomas Tuchel after a poor start to the season and yesterday's 1-0 loss to Dinamo Zagreb in the Champions League. Well, he led Chelsea to the Champions League title in 2021 and the Club World Cup crown in 2022. My colleague Laura McGee is in the BBC Sports newsroom. Laura, tell us, is this a shock?
Hi, Gita. Yes, I think it probably will have been a bit of a shock to football fans, certainly Chelsea fans this morning. Chelsea have indeed sacked head coach Thomas Tuchel. The German, 49 years old, has left Stamford Bridge just 7 matches into the season following that 1-0 defeat by Dinamo Zagreb in the Champions League last night. He joined the club the 26th of January 2021. He signed an 18-month contract with the option for an extra year with the Premier League side, replacing Frank Lampard. Then, of course, not the best run of results they've had, and last night was a shock against Dinamo Zagreb, losing 1-0. In the statement that was released earlier by the club, they thanked him for his service and they said that they won't be releasing any more information on who may succeed him in the role. But last night, you may have heard Thomas Tuchel, he was pretty damning about their performance and about his own performance for the club. So yes, that news just coming in the last hour that Chelsea have parted ways with Thomas Tuchel. We'll bring you more throughout the day on the BBC News channel.
And Laura, just quickly, football managing always seems a very brutal trade. You can be cast out very fast. Have the names yet come in for who could come in next, and any reaction as yet from fans?
Well, it literally only happened in the last 10 minutes or so, Gita, so we're not quite there yet, but I am sure it doesn't take long in the world of football for names to be coming out from all directions. We'll be bringing you those names and indeed the reaction, but it is pretty shocking that it's happened just so soon after last night's defeat. But who will replace him? Who knows?
Laura, thanks very much indeed for now. Just let me update you also on the retrial of Ryan Giggs. He is going to face a retrial after a jury failed to reach a verdict in his trial, which came to an end last week. Peter Wright QC for the prosecution said the case had been discussed at a senior level by the Crown Prosecution Service and there was a willingness of witnesses to give evidence again. Ryan Giggs is charged with coercive and controlling behaviour and 2 counts of assault, which he denies. He wasn't required to attend the hearing that happened today and wasn't present. But the date for the new trial has been given. It is July the 31st next year, with a pre-trial hearing on July the 3rd. So that news just also breaking it within the last hour. The former Manchester United footballer Ryan Giggs will face a retrial next summer. The Washington Post says that some of the classified documents seized at the Florida home of Donald Trump were so sensitive that even the Biden administration